This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
This episode contains detailed discussions of a terrorist attack and graphic medical procedures that some listeners may find disturbing. Please consider your well-being before continuing.
Mona says to me and puts his hand on my water bottle and says, "Louisa, anytime you need your medication, you don't have to ask me. You just take it."
Gee.
You know, this is the duplicitous, double-minded nature of the man. You know, 1 minute going to kill me, the next minute concerned that I have MS and I need medication. And, you know, that was, I suppose, the truth of this man. Very polite, lots of ways, courteous, and at the same time willing to kill you.
Welcome to She Wasn't Born Yesterday, the pod that fearlessly chats about all things affecting us ladies who are 40 plus fabulous.
Well, and the guys that want to know what we think.
Well, them too. I'm Janet Evans, advertising creative.
And I'm Jenny Woodhouse, semi-retired social worker.
In other words, you're busier than ever. We're J&J and we're super thrilled you're with us, or she wasn't born yesterday. Gorgeous. Well, picture this, if you can. I just want to paint you a picture. Okay, it's a Monday morning, 10 days before Chrissy, and it's 11 years ago, only 11 years ago. It feels like a lot longer ago, but it's your typical hot, steamy Sydney summer day. We love a good sweat, don't we? I know you do especially.
I do especially.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of us were at work pretending to do stuff, but really we were, you know, online Googling PAV recipes and last-minute holidays destinations and gifts for our second cousin's niece twice removed.
I found a good one that year.
Oh, yeah. What did you find? Yeah, anyway. I don't know about you, but I was working at an ad agency in the city at the time, and the news broke around sort of 9:45-ish, I think, that there was a hostage situation in Martin Place. It was at the Lint Cafe, which I'd never actually been to. I'd seen it because I used to catch a bus outside the Channel 7
I remember
studios.
it. Yeah, right on Martin Place, down on the corner.
Yeah, just opposite Channel 7. And as the day went on, we were watching it in sort of growing horror, I think, on the TV, as we saw, you know, different shots like hands against the cafe window. We saw a banner. We saw these blurry, long lens shots of people inside, and it just kept going on and on and on. And, you know, this huge police presence. And then I realised I couldn't get my usual bus home because they'd locked down the entire area outside the, you know, Channel 7. And watching on the outside, I mean, that was one thing.
It was horrific.
It was horrific. And I think we just all felt this sense of what is going on? You know, how can this be? It's Sydney. It's before Christmas.
It's the Lint Cafe.
Exactly. It's chocolate. It's good vibes. It's good times. But we can only imagine, we were talking about this before, it's impossible to imagine what it was like inside that room. And so today, our fabulous 40-plus guest, she's Louisa Hope, who was inside the Lint Cafe that day that the terrorist came inside and held everybody up for 16 long hours. And she is here to talk to us about not just what happened that day, but also the effects on her and other people involved longer term. Louisa Hope, great surname. Welcome to She Wasn't Born Yesterday.
Welcome.
Thank you, girls. That's really a great entry. Thank you.
We aim for a great entry, but we can't guarantee about the rest. Anyway, Louisa, aside from the allure of Arabica beans and aircon that day, that obvious allure, what drew you to the cafe at around 9-ish that day, and who were you with?
I was with my mother, Robin, and we actually had gone into town the night before. We had an appointment with a family lawyer that happened to be in the tower block behind the Lint. So Mum and I went into the Hilton. We stayed, we had dinner. It was a lovely evening. And then in the morning, we went through that process of, you know, all our normal routines, you know, quiet time and all that kind of stuff. And my prayer for that day had been, well, whatever's meant to be, Lord God, you know, it's going to happen. So, you know, not imagining quite what did happen, of course. But there we were, Mum and I, and just waiting in the cafe until it was time to go up to see the lawyer. Yes, we kind of decided at the Hilton whether we'd have breakfast at the Hilton or go up to the Lint, and we just slid through that door into the cab, and up we went to the Lint, and sat there, had breakfast, no big deal, apart from my mother, who was facing in towards the cafe, and I was facing the wall, looking at her, and she kept saying to me, "What's going on there? Who's that man?" I'm going, "What man, Mum?" And, drink your coffee, that kind of thing. And she's commenting, giving me a commentary about this man who was obviously talking to the manager, and who's he? He doesn't look right. What's he doing here? And in the end, I just said, "Mum, just, drink your coffee, leave the man alone to his breakfast, And you kind of like look back in hindsight and sort of think, sometimes you really should listen to your mum.
Yes.
It was that kind of a moment. And so, yes, that was our morning. Just one more cup of coffee. Otherwise, we would have gone up to the lawyer. But anyway, there you go.
So did you turn around and look at him at all?
Well, it's a funny thing, Jenny, because I actually, how you just sort of turn around when someone says, just something's going on over there, right?
Don't look now.
Don't look now. That's right. Don't look now. And that's exactly what happened. And, that's when I sort of chastised her a bit and said, just relax, Mum,
What could possibly go wrong?
That's right.
Yes. And so when you saw him, what did you think of him, and what actually happened next?
Well, I got up to go and pay because it was time to go. And I got up to go and pay, and the little girl I was paying was taking my money with her mouth. She was just agog. And I'm thinking, what is wrong with this kid, And, but of course she could see what I couldn't, and that was behind me. He was standing up, putting on his bandana and his, adjusting himself and making his little speech about how we were under attack. He wanted to speak to the Prime Minister of Australia and that we were all hostages. And so I'd turned around by then and I thought, this is ridiculous. We're across the road from Channel 7. And, the minute he pulled out his gun, I was like, oh, this is real. Yeah.
Right.
We'll take this seriously now.
There's a heart-stopping moment for
Yeah,
you.
it certainly was. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all going to die because that's
So-
what terrorists do.
Is that what went through your mind? You thought, oh, this is it. He's just going to shoot everybody.
Yes.
Right.
That's right.
Oh,
I thought,
wow.
this is it. Here I come, God, ready or not. This is, we will die. But of course, that's obviously not what happened, but that's what terrorists normally do.
They do. And what about the other folks in the cafe? Did you have the wherewithal to notice what was happening for them?
Well, it was an interesting mix. There was a whole lot of young Lint workers. They were all quite young. And, most of them were on their uni break doing, summer holiday kind of thing. And then, of course, several workers from around Martin Place. So, yes, it was a mixed bag. And then my mother and I, of all the people who were there, were the people who should not have been there, because we'd come in from out of town and, all that kind of thing. And so really, everyone else kind of belonged there, if you like, the Lint workers and the general city workers around Martin Place. And we were also, of course, mother and daughter related. So that was a little bit different as well. But there you go. You just don't know your day.
Look, I think, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, from that point of view, I think you've done it for most of the population of the world for all time. And so what did he do then? What actually happened then?
Well, then his primary focus was in having us get in touch with media. So it very quickly become amongst us in the room, not spoken, because he told us that we weren't allowed. He separated us out. He separated my mother and I. We weren't allowed to talk to each other. He took all of our identification and all that kind of stuff. And he positioned Mum and I in different places. So she was behind me and I was sitting in a seat in front of her. And then he positioned everybody slightly different. He had people standing up at the windows and all that kind of thing. And his primary focus was to get media attention. One thing I can say for sure is that man was not there to convert us that day.
Yeah.
It was definitely, he had his own agenda and he really wanted this media attention and to speak to the Prime Minister on national radio. That was his whole focus, especially in the early part. So, yes, that's what we did.
Yeah, right. And how were you feeling? Were you in absolute shock and kind of numb, or was the adrenaline like absolutely peaking?
Yeah, like it was, it's a long time to be in an adrenaline rush, I've got to say. But it certainly was adrenaline and paying ultra attention and being very focused. And, really it took a while for me to move from we're going to die to, okay, this is a new situation. We are being held hostage, as he'd said. And I guess then it was waiting for the police to come, because of course, I don't know about the others so much, but certainly for my mother and I, we absolutely assumed that the police were going to come and rescue us,
Yes.
Okay. And so could you hear sirens outside? Were you aware that they were outside?
We were. It wasn't so much that there were sirens, but interestingly enough, you could see their reflection in the marble of the Reserve Bank building across the road. So there's a little, there's a doorway, of course, which is a glass door, and we could just see and make out their movements there. Not much really, but just enough to sort of like, okay, the police are here. And this is going to sound very strange, but honestly, you could feel them. And that's just crazy, I know, because, there's marble brick walls between us, but you could feel the police. And that was comforting. We knew that they were there. He kept pushing them back. Like we eventually had a contact with the police negotiators. So we were saying, get back. He wants everyone to get back. And he wanted a van moved and all that kind of stuff on the street. So that kind of happened early in the piece.
So you were in phone communication with the police, or he was?
Eventually. No. All communication with the police was done through us, through the hostages. Okay. And so sometimes he would have us with the phone on speaker and sometimes not, usually on speaker, so he could hear. So we were dealing with the police negotiators at that stage, all through the night, really. So we were telling them and they were, trying to tell us as well, so it was a bit kind of confusing.
What were they trying to do, the negotiators?
Pacify us, really, I think, and then also speak to him. Because in these kind of negotiating sort of situations for police force around the world is that they isolate. That's one of the principles. They isolate the offender with the idea of having direct communication with them and that they are the only people that he is communicating with. However, that never happened in the case of the Lint. All correspondence or communication was done through us. He himself never spoke to the police.
Really?
That's fascinating.
Okay.
So he'd worked that out already, or
yeah, I think so. And so whether or not he was aware of that particular, protocol, but he definitely didn't want to speak to the police directly. And so what would happen was that, like at one stage, he had me ring 000. So I'm ringing 000, and this is very early in the piece, and 000, I'm on the phone with 000, and they're saying, how many are you and where are you and what are you doing? All these 50,000 questions from 000. And he, at the same time, he had said to me, say this. And, and then, of course, I'm trying to answer them and say what he wants at the same time. It was just a little chaotic in those moments. It was a bit scary, like.
A bit scary, do you think?
The man with the gun and the supposed bomb, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, he said he had a bomb?
Well, yes. I think they said they could see through the window that there were wires coming out of his bag or something like that. It came out later that was sort of one of the primary reasons why the police didn't storm the place immediately, because, if a bomb had gone off, then that was it for everybody,
yes.
right? Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later because that's a really interesting aspect to this whole story. But then some hostages escaped, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, that was wild.
So tell us about that.
We're all sitting around being good little hostages, and what we were doing is actually placating him and trying to get him the media attention he wanted, and also to give him the impression that we were on his side. Because I think we collectively, even though we didn't speak about it, I think we collectively worked out that we just got to keep him happy until the police come. But when the first lot of hostages went out, it was such a shock to all of us. Like there was this bang, and then 3 of the men had gotten out who were seated. They were seated on individual chairs at the front of the cafe at the near the doorway. And one of them had quickly worked out how to press the emergency button, which was near the floor, and then run through the doors as they opened. And another one of them got out through the back way through the kitchen. But in the immediate moment, the gunman quickly jumped up, grabbed me, had me by the back of the neck kind of thing. And I thought, great, the police are going to come in and they're going to shoot him and shoot me at the same time. like, so I was bent over and he was, screaming and carrying on and everyone was up on their feet. It was like, because the police are coming, right? That's what we all thought. And then young Jared Morton Hoffman, who really was a hero on the day, shouted out, no, the police aren't coming. They've escaped. And that just dropped the temperature in the room instantly. And it dropped his temperature. He went, oh, okay, everyone back in their seats. So everyone went back to their seats. And then he said, you should all thank Jared because I thought the police were coming and I was going to kill this lady.
Wow.
I was going to kill this lady. So you should thank Jared for, and I'm thinking, thank you, Jared. Gosh, because it was just in that moment. Yeah. So there were several moments, during the whole day. It was like incredibly tense, but that was one of those, yes, I'm going to die right now moments as well, so.
My goodness.
Hold on.
And so his demeanour, man Monis, through the day kind of went up and down. Is that right?
Yes, you could say that. I mean, the man wasn't crazy and the man was not evil. The man was just a bad man, a violent, bad man who made a very bad decision. So, really, his demeanour was up and down. And interestingly, it was interesting to watch him get to know us and get to know individuals amongst the group. And then when it came time for him to work out who he was going to kill, you could see him almost the wheels turning and him calculating who had done him favours and who hadn't and who'd helped him, which was, things like media and that kind of thing. And, of course, and who he was going to let out, because at one stage he was willing to let someone out and he actually was quite happy about that. There were 2 women in the room who were pregnant. And then, of course, there was my mother and I. And Mum was older, and I was older too. I was 50-something then. And so, it was interesting to watch and observe him, how he become more aware of us as individuals. He always referred to Tori Johnson, who was the manager, as manager. And he always referred to my mother as Louisa's mother. Huh? But everybody else, and then Stefan, who was one of the young men in there, he referred to him as white shirt. So it's an interesting thing how he was personalizing some of us with our names and depersonalizing others by using things that were referenced to him personally, Fortunately, Stefan got out. He was one of the ones that got out. And that was a good thing. Those 3 men who got out, I'm so grateful that they did because heaven knows what. The ending was bad enough without more.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And so Jared was one of the Link Cafe workers, right? A young guy. He was like a waiter or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. He was 19 at the time. He was amazing.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And we understand that at some point, Man Monis kind of corralled everybody into a corner. Is that right or not?
That's correct. If anybody had been to the Link Cafe, it's a funny little shape. There was a little pocket or a corner area, really, and that's where we all were. He surrounded himself with the women and kept the men in the outer sort of circle, controlling us all, of course, with the gun and the threat of the bomb and all that kind of thing. So, it was a tense time.
Very tense.
Did he ever talk about himself at all?
No, he did not. The only time, actually, my mother again. So my mother, at one stage, she stood up. She put her hands on her hips and she says, and I'm thinking, uh-oh, here we go.
A lecture.
She says, I want to go to the bathroom and my daughter needs her medication. And at which time he sends my mother to the bathroom with 2 of the lint workers, Jared and Fiona, which was the habit through the day that we had to go with lint workers. So off my mother goes, and then he calls me over, sit right next to him. I'm sitting right next to him thinking, great, Mum, the cops are going to come in and I'm going to be sitting right next to him. Anyway, but here we were. He wasn't talking about himself, but he says to me, why do you have to have medication? I say, okay, well, I have multiple sclerosis and I need medication. I actually wasn't on medication for MS, but I was taking painkillers at the time. My mum knew that, mums. So he then gives me the 3rd degree about the MS and blah, blah, and where is it? In my handbag. Pull open my handbag. I pull up my green Tupperware bottle with my water in it, and I take my pills and that's fine. Thanks, Mum. That was great. A little later on, Mona says to me and puts his hand on my water bottle and says, Louisa, anytime you need your medication, you don't have to ask me. You just take it. And I was like, I thought, he obviously thinks my medication is in the bottle. Okay, I say, thank you very much.
Gee.
You know,
That's
this is the
fascinating.
duplicitous, double-minded nature of the man. You know, 1 minute going to kill me, the next minute concerned that I have MS and I need medication. So, you know, what's that? That's that double-mindedness. And, you know, that was, I suppose, the truth of this man.
Mm.
You know, he was the kind of man, we know those type of men, you know, the men who tell their wives they love them and then bash them to a pulp in the next breath. And he was that kind of man. Very polite, lots of ways, courteous, and at the same time willing to kill you.
And he did kill Tori, the manager of the
That's
Lead
right.
Cafe, didn't he? And
Yes.
oh my goodness, I mean, that would have been the most traumatic thing ever.
Was.
I hope that you didn't see it, but
Yeah.
I'm sure people possibly did.
Well, you know, by that time, most of the people were out of the cafe. Mum and I were either side of him, the gunman, and he had prepped himself. Tori was kneeling on the ground. And the gunman was prepping himself. He was putting extra bullets into his gun and adjusting himself. And I thought, he's going to kill Tori, right? You know, and what can I do? There's nothing I could do. And he adjusted himself and then bang, he shot the gun up into the corner of the room. Tori flinched. Oh, thank goodness he didn't shoot Tori. Okay then. And then we waited. We just were waiting for the police to come. Nothing happened. They didn't come. And then he did it again. He started to adjust himself and he prepped, you know, with the rifle to shoot. And this time he shot Tori and Tori fell forward with his hands still on his head and he just fell forward. And it was one of those moments where you think maybe he's just hit him in the shoulder or he's just, you know, and he's fallen forward and maybe Tori's hit his head. And I went through that kind of irrational rationalizing and hoping. But of course, no, that's not what happened. He had killed Tori then.
Gosh.
How was your mum through all of that as well?
Mum was on the other side of me, on the other side of him. And so she told me later that she didn't actually see him shoot Tori because she was faced at a slightly different angle. So whereas I was faced forward with Monis, Mum was slightly facing to the right. So she didn't actually see it. And I'm so grateful that she did.
Yeah, absolutely. But so why didn't the police come earlier? And I think that was the question that was asked for a long time after this siege and sifting through everything that happened. What was the delay?
There were several delays. Like I went to the inquest, which was traumatizing in and of itself. It was quite shocking. But, you know, the police's rationale was, of course, they thought he had a bomb. Other jurisdictions gave evidence at the inquest. The Met from London and Scotland Yard, they both gave evidence to say that when they have terrorist attacks and there's a threat of a bomb, they go in as soon as possible. However, our force at the time chose not to. They chose to hold back, thinking that they could wait him out. So I think that was the police's thinking, that they could wait him out and then eventually, because that's normally what happens in hostage situations. This was not quite normal, however. So there was that. But of course, the bigger question, and that was thoroughly investigated and pulled to pieces at the inquest. The police were very thoroughly investigated at that inquest, and many things have changed as a result. The question that remains outstanding, however, is that we do not know why this violent man was out on bail. He had sexually assaulted, I think it was about 48 different victims, and he had been an accessory before the fact to the horrendously violent murder of his wife. So, you know, he was a known, and of course he'd also sent those revolting letters to the families of people who died in Afghanistan, you know, fighting in Afghanistan, which is absolutely outrageous. So anyway, the police knew him. He had a track record and the judiciary knew him. However, he was released on bail. I think it was 4 or 5 days before he committed the crime in the Lint. So, yes, that's the question that we still have no answers for, which really, of all the things, I have to say, why? And how does that happen? And has that issue of violent men being allowed back out into the community been addressed yet? You know, whether it's a woman fleeing domestic violence or people not wanting to die by terrorist attack. It's the same. Violence is violence, and the sense of terror is the same, I believe.
And has there been at any point an apology to the hostages from the police or the whoever?
No, actually, no formal apology as such. The inquest was pretty arduous. However, there's been no formal apology. And this is an interesting thing about victims of terror. And I'm now involved with VOTA, which is Victims of Terrorism Australia, which is a support group for people who've been involved in mass casualties like Bondi or something like the Lint. And there's far more Australians than you would have any idea have been involved in terror around the world. So one of the things that comes to mind is that there is no formal apology. It's more like, oh, well, that was bad luck for you on the day that you were there. But of course, the thing about the victims of terror is that when you are a victim of a terrorist event, you become the state, because the terrorist doesn't care about you as an individual, not interested. They care about inflicting damage and wounds on the state. So it's a weird thing to think of yourself as the state. However, that's where we are positioned, really. I was at a conference when I learnt that, and I thought, my goodness, that sums it up, because this event didn't just happen to us inside the cafe. It happened to our whole country. All of us, people have memories of where they were that day, and they're impacted in one way or the other,
That's very profound, isn't it? Yeah, because I hadn't thought about that, because at the time I sort of thought, there's no precedent for this. Like, how would the police know when the right time to go in would be? With all of those people in there, all their lives, they must have just been doing endless calculations and sort of, if we do that, then that would happen, or perhaps this would happen, or perhaps it'll just detonate the bomb, or, because he didn't seem to actually have, us looking from the outside, it seemed like he didn't actually have a plan for the end game. He knew what he was going to do at the beginning, and that happened. But then as time went on, there were just these strange demands, and I want an ISIS flag, which never happened. And it was just seemed a bit open-ended. And
yes.
I think all of us were thinking, as I'm sure you were, how is this going to resolve?
Yes. And where are the police? Where are the police?
Where are the police?
What are the police?
Yeah.
Yes.
And then but the shooting of Tory was the catalyst for them then to storm the cafe, wasn't it?
That's right, yes.
Do you remember how that unfolded?
Yes, that was quite, like he shot Tory, and then we waited. And I'm thinking, they've got to come in now. If they don't come in now, what's next, Mum and I? There were other ladies who had not escaped when all the hostages ran out at the end. They were still there, but Monis didn't know about them. He only knew about Mum and I and Tory. So fortunately, he did not know about them. But I was scrambling, thinking the next thing is Mum and I kneeling on the ground like he did with Tory. That was going to be the next thing. And we're waiting. And when you're waiting, it feels like forever, of course.
Yeah.
And in that circumstance, it certainly felt like just so long-ended. It wasn't actually, well, it was in the context, but it was, I think my memory's being tested here, but I think it was about 10 minutes, like the whole ending. It wasn't that long, really. So we're waiting. And then the next minute, the room is full of colour and lights and flashing. And, of course, they'd thrown in one of those flashbangs and it had gone off. And so it was like, those things do what they say they're going to do, and that is they're going to disorientate. You're totally disorientating completely. And then all of a sudden the shooting started. So they're shooting him from the front door and also from the back door, and Mum and I are just standing either side of him.
Wow.
And, stupid me, too much television in my youth, I think. I just sat there and said in my head, if I just stand still, they'll miss me. They'll only crazy, right? But, you think the weirdest things. And so, I'm standing there and it's all going off around me. I had lost sight of where Mum was. Monis was right near me. And then I got knocked and pushed me to fall onto the floor. So Monis at that stage probably had been hit and he was going down. I'd been hit by his backpack or something like that. So I'm on the floor then, and I'm thinking, it just didn't stop. It just kept going, the noise. And at the time I was lying on the floor with my hands covering my eyes, and I thought, we've waited this whole day, but we are going to definitely die now.
Oh,
Yes.
And I remember
right.
thinking, we might as well just watch,
Wow.
So I took my hands away from my eyes, opened my eyes. I couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black, and there was all the smoke from the gunfire.
Right.
And you could see the smoke through the shards of light that were coming in from outside, and it just kept going, and then bang, like that, it stopped. Just stopped. And, of course, in between there and then I had taken a shrapnel wound to my foot. And, that was peculiar because in the moment I was looking and I could see my foot, and I could tell that the straps on my favorite red sandals had gone. And I thought, oh no, how am I going to get that fixed? And at the same time, I'm thinking we're going to die, it's crazy where your brain goes. And then after I had seen it, it was then that the pain came in, but I figured I couldn't scream out in pain because the police were still shooting, so they mustn't know where he is. And I didn't want to alert him to where I was. And it was just it was insane. It's worse than any movie you've ever imagined. It's just unbelievable.
I can't even, no, I
can
don't want to
the
imagine.
noise too.
Oh,
just
yes.
The noise.
Yeah. Oh, and the walls were marble, weren't they? So, and I believe that's how Katrina Dawson was killed, because the same thing that happened to you, shrapnel, sort of, you can imagine bouncing off those marble walls and creating shards of rock, basically. So you got out of there. You'd been hit by a bullet. You obviously were taken to emergency and all of that. But how have you managed to kind of process all of this in the ensuing days, weeks, months, years, Louisa?
Well, I went into emergency absolutely thinking that I had lost my foot. I would lose my foot. And I remember 50,000 thoughts. And I also thought that my mother had to have died because there was no way you could be in there and survive. I come out with such an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The TOU guy, I was sitting there sort of checking my head, making sure I was all in one piece. And he comes rushing and he says, get up, run. And I'm thinking, why run? It's over. He says, and I go, okay, he's over the top of me. You don't say no to those dudes, right? So he hauls me up. I said, my foot, and he hauls me up. He says, well, can you hop? And I'm like, can I hop? Sure. Not really, but okay, sure. And so I'm trying to hop out of the cafe. Fortunately, two of them come behind me and pick me up. And so off we go out onto Phillip Street. They lay me out there on Phillip Street. And, the gratitude, I was just overwhelmed with that sense of gratitude. And, God, I have survived this. Why have I survived this? And I thought for sure my mother was dead. And I thought, how am I going to tell my family that I was looking after Mum and she's died? I'm thinking, oh, no. Anyway, all these crazy thoughts, your brain is just flooded with all sorts of chemicals and, so there we were. We went to the Prince of Wales Hospital, which was good, and we get into emergency, and the first emergency nurse I say to her, okay, so just tell me straight, what do you think? Am I going to lose my foot? And she says, yeah, I've seen worse, And in that moment, and I thought, right, okay, Louisa, calm down. Stop catastrophizing.
Stop catastrophizing.
Because that would never happen.
But, so I just sort of calmed myself. And then we're in there, and then I'm speaking to the two cops are there, and trying to tell them as much as I possibly can because, I knew that I have to go for some surgery for this foot situation. And we're chatter, 100 miles an hour. And then the emergency nurse comes to me and she says, okay, then we're just going to cut off your dress. And I was like, no, I love this dress, And no, she says, that's what we do. We cut off your dress. And I suddenly was like, this can't be happening. I'm going to complain to somebody about this business about cutting off my dress. This is ridiculous.
It was much worse than the siege, losing your dress.
Priorities, right? And so, because that was that dress, that black dress that, you wear to weddings, parties, funerals, that dress, right?
That one.
So anyway, so she comes at me with the big scissors and she's cutting up my dress up like this. And then, I turn to the two cops who are just right there beside me and I say, you can't let her do this. And they go, whoa, and they they take off. Where's a cop when you need one, right? They just
Exactly.
disappeared. And so she's cutting away and I'm like, and as she does, she pulls my dress up over my head and I help her pull it, take it up over my head. And as we did this, my hands come up over my belly and my hands are full of blood. And it was like, oh, where did that come from? And, you know, that emergency nurse, God bless her, we had a little moment where I looked at her and she looked at me. It was like, and, you know, she knew that I knew that she was right. You know, that's why they cut off your dress. And so they cut off my dress and, you know, my hands are full of blood and it's like I'd taken shrapnel to my belly area and I did not even feel it.
Wow.
Didn't even feel it. And of course, it was very messy. But then, you know, between us girls, she then says, I'm just going to cut off your bra.
Mm.
And which is no big deal, except I bought that bra only 3 days earlier when I was in Texas, Dallas, Texas.
Really?
It was just like, you can't, this is brand new.
A
But there was
souvenir
no
one.
sympathy, honestly. She's just, you know, God love her, you know, really bless her because, you know, she's doing her job and I'm being a disagreeable patient. But anyway, off everything goes and down to surgery I go and I actually had 3 surgeries. And so, you know, it was pretty full on. But after the first surgery, the doctor, you know how the doctor comes after you've had surgery? He comes around and sees you the next morning and that kind of thing. So the doctor came. She was lovely, just beautiful. And she says to me, Louisa, and I went, oh my goodness, I have lost my foot. And I just like, my heart's pounding away and I'm strung up to every imaginable, you know, tube. And she says, oh, I'm so sorry. And like the doctor says, I'm so sorry.
Mm.
And she says to me, we tried really hard, but we just couldn't get that shrapnel out of your belly. And so I was so relieved and she was so sorry. She didn't do my foot. She just did my belly. And so I said to her, hey, doc, shame you couldn't have done a little lipo while you were down there, right? And she, you know, I thought she could have a little laugh.
Sure.
No, she's like this. She's like, Louisa, your fat saved your life.
Good.
Talk
know.
about
Heard that.
bedside manner.
Yes.
I know, right? And you'd never hear that again. I mean, you know,
No, that's
No.
right.
I'm still being encouraged in that direction, general weight loss. But, you know, in that moment, and you kind of think to yourself, of all the things you want to change about yourself, of all the things that you would like to be different,
Mm.
you never know when something in your life is preventing something else.
Mm.
You know, and quite
So
literally.
true.
That's
So
right.
true.
Because she then, because I had to ask her to repeat herself because I couldn't believe what she said. And she said, yes, that's right. Your fat saved your life because if that shrapnel had gotten into your abdomen cavity, things could have been very different. And I was
Wow.
like, right, yeah, okay.
Note to self,
Yes.
put on weight.
Yes.
I know, right?
I'll
Yeah,
do
no
that.
reason not to.
I'll
Actually,
start today.
I'm not here to start, you know, the concept don't lose weight. Far from it. But, you know, like you don't know. You know, when
Yeah,
we
it's
complain about
amazing.
what bugs us about ourselves or other people,
Yes.
we should just ask that little question, what is it saving me from?
Yes. Wow, that's
Yeah.
an excellent outcome to this. I'd never expected that from you, Louisa. You know,
Quite impressive, really.
emotionally, how has that taken its toll?
Well, you know, like I said to you, I was full of gratitude and quite frankly, I can only describe how I was after the siege as euphoric.
Mm.
I went into like this euphoria. And of course, after 3 months in hospital, we then started the Louisa Hope Fund for Nurses at Prince of Wales. And that got very busy very quickly. We're doing a lot of speaking events to raise money and that kind of thing. Interestingly, Mum's experience was very different in that, I mean, this woman was very stoic and very in control and always had an upturn. But she actually went down. The siege really broke her heart, actually, I think. Whereas I was going up, you know, and so I went into like a euphoria and probably lasted in that for a good 2 years. And then I was still very busy continuing with speaking, the police and Rotary, all sorts of different things. So very busy and probably about, it was year 8. So only recently, it was year 8. I was starting to have what they call, psychologists called invasive thoughts. So, you know, you're just sitting here and all of a sudden some random violent thought comes into your mind and you go, where did that come from? For me, it was happening just as I was starting to drift off to sleep. And that would wake me so much. Sometimes I'd have to get up and have a cup of tea and start the sleep cycle again. So it was really disturbing my sleep, and I was in a lot of pain. So doctor sent me to a pain specialist, which I was tad cynical about because I thought pain specialist will just offer me pills. What's that going to do? But I went, and the pain specialist said to me that he could help me with a tiny little sleeper, which he gave me, a temporary kind of thing, and that he insisted that I had to go and see a psychologist. And I said to him, I'm not depressed. I'm not sad. I am blessed that, I survived the siege. And he says, no. He said, whether you like it or not, the situation that you have been through, of course, you are going to have PTSD. And I was really I'm pretty happy, right? But yes, so you have PTSD. So I go and see this psychologist because he assured me that the psychologist he was sending me to was dealing with returned veterans and also police. And I thought, well, maybe she might know what I've gone through, have an idea about that kind of thing. I go to the psychologist, and I am so grateful for that because, it didn't take long for me to realize that things like, she asked me about my sleep, and I said, and I told her about these weird thoughts and how insane they were, and God knows where they came from. I knew they didn't come from my own heart, but they just were there. So she suggested that we do EMDR therapy.
Okay, what's that?
Well, EMDR, as I understand, stands for eye movement desensitization reprogramming. Someone should check that, but I think that that's what it stands for. And it sounds complicated, but actually it's so simple. It was COVID at the time, so the therapist and I were working online. And what happened was she pulled up a screen between the two of us, and it was just like a little ping pong ball going from one side to the other, boink, boink, that had sound as well. So, she says, just watch the ball. What happened was we agreed before we started that we would talk through every major incident during the siege. So that means, every incident in a day that was pretty hectic, every little incident along the way that, remained with me or felt really heavy. So we started, of course, with Tori's death. And, start at the hard end, why not? And I'm following the little ball, boink, boink, boink. And, of course, with that in my mind, it was a very easy way to work through the process of what happened on that day. So we had several sessions, and I am so grateful for it because, quite frankly, it changed everything. It's a particular therapy. It's another tool that the psychologists have in their toolkit. And it's for me, it worked really well. And, what we went through really, actually, when I look back, it really was traumatic. And PTSD is real, and it's caused by all sorts of things. And ordinary people live their lives with PTSD in their minds, in their hearts. And that breaks my heart to think about that, especially our first responders, and they carry it around with them, people who've been victims of violence, all sorts of things. And so, there is a way through. And of course, because I live a life based on grace and prayer, and those things have always got me through. But, when this overwhelming pain, and that was the other thing I learned from the pain specialist, was that psychological pain can manifest in physical pain. I never knew that before. But, that nobody's afraid to go and see a doctor if they break their leg. Something's not quite working in their head. They go, oh, no, I won't do that,
I'll fix it.
That's right. But
I'm normal.
Course,
yep.
I'm okay. I'm strong, and of course I was strong and I am strong, but, there was a glitch caused by what I had experienced. And so to get that glitch fixed, I had to go to a doctor who knew what to do.
Wow, Louisa, I think most people would consider it more than just a glitch.
I was thinking that. Describe glitch.
Actually, it sounds like kind of a hypnosis thing almost.
Yeah, I would have thought so too. And I asked the therapist, is this like a self-hypnosis? She said, no, it's not. It's got something to do, as I understand it, they still are researching and working out exactly what the process is within the mind. But as I understand it, it's like your active mind is distracted.
Right.
And your subconscious mind is working through what the issue might be. And so, it brings a healing that I did not expect. and I am grateful. But, you know, and of course, my opinion about EMDR is not scientific at all. People need to check on that. But, you know, it's very liberating.
Have you been able to forgive Man Monis for what he did?
That's, you know, an interesting question. I have been asked that before. And I have to say that actually when it comes to Man Monis, I didn't have to forgive him, because on that day I really thought that I was going to die, as we all did actually in hindsight. But, you know, so for me, I was absolutely active and keeping short accounts with God, and because I was not going to go to God with a heart full of hate. I was not going to let that man fill my heart with hate, because, you know, like, I'm going to God, so I don't want that there. You know, I don't want that clutter. And so when I went to the inquest and I found out about him and the atrocities, the wickedness that he had committed against women in his community and his own wife, you know, and I realized the violence of the man, I was very angry with him. But it was still not a point of forgiveness. It was just that we've got to find a way to find justice and resolve and work through this violence in our men as to how and why. You know, because, of course, you know, it wasn't just Manharon Monis, this violence. We have to remember, and sometimes we forget as Australians, but the atrocity that happened in Christchurch was perpetrated by a young Australian man, one of us, our own. So, you know, the undercurrent of violence is broad. We all know that these days. And what and how can we address that? You know, the mechanisms of terrorism are, you know, looked after by people like ASIO and the police and all that kind of thing. But for us as ordinary people, we have to work out as a community, how do we deal with this anger and hate? That's our job. That's a part of what we have to do to mitigate. This is what we commonly call now as community counterterrorism. This is how we are active, by working out and helping each other across communities, all communities, to lower the level of angst and hate and violence that results.
And so are these the kind of steps that you think we can take to kind of prevent something from happening in the future, something like this?
I think that it's multi-layered. We have to have the combatants. We have to have the police actively involved. We have to have ASIO, you know, because there's a whole lot of stuff happening online these days amongst young people. I mean, motivation and the push for various terrorist attacks, even here in Australia, can be sourced through online sources, you know, the Christchurch situation, you know, that kind of thing. And the young man who attacked the bishop in the church, you know, their contacts and their connections and their provocation is online. It's not the tool of online, it's the content of online. And so how do we undo that? We have to be very vigilant. You know, we have to be actively engaged in toning down the hate. And, you know, as women, as mothers, we have a place for that amongst our young, well, let's face it, our young men. And so as that becomes more the norm, as the idea of not being angry and not being hateful becomes the norm, that can help contribute to the broader picture that our governments around the world are trying to, you know, eliminate terrorism. I think that terrorism, one way or another, will always exist because it is the consequence of human nature, and it is the consequence of unchecked resentfulness and anger and hate. So, you know, but if we are busy with the checking ourselves in our own families and our own communities, then it will spread.
That's so true. Louisa, have you got advice, I guess, for others who might have experienced trauma in their lives? You were saying it took a good 8 years before you actually headed off to see a psychologist. Do you think that was too long? Do you think you went at the right time? What would you say to others experiencing trauma?
I can only speak from my experience, and that is that, you know, I think that we could do a bit of work amongst us all, you know, in our community groups, all that kind of thing, where we contemplate the fact that trauma is abroad in our community and we hide it. You know, we do. You know, nobody would have suspected that I was in a state of PTSD because I actually didn't even recognize it myself, and I'm pretty well informed. But, you know, like, I didn't recognize it. And so often we don't recognize things about ourselves. Somebody else might recognize that. And, we should speak more. We think about how suicide is abroad and you think, how did that happen? I can't believe it. He was such a nice guy. He looked like he had everything together, but actually, so we need to check deeper with each other. And that's something we can do together for each other and for ourselves. And, I'm fine. No worries. I'm fine. That's our little mantra, isn't it? We've got to get over that. And also the idea of seeing a psychologist is just like seeing any other doctor. And it's important that we do that check. Many years ago, I was doing a bit of study and a psychologist who was leading the lecture at the time said most ordinary people who had ordinary, happy growing up lives, everything was normal and steady. Even ordinary people probably need a good 4 years of therapy.
Wow.
That's right.
There
So,
you go.
where does that leave all of us?
Yeah, the rest of us.
You better go and book in, I think, Janet, very soon. Yes.
I think so. Yeah, I'm going to come and see you. Well, Louisa, it's just been absolutely incredible to hear this story because you were on the inside, the rest of us were on the outside looking in, and to hear about just the impact of all of that on your life. One last thing I want to know is, are you still in touch with any of the other people who were there that day and how are they going?
Well, some of them I am in touch. They're also young. The majority of them were young people. And so within our cohort, we have bereaved. That's people who are the families of the two that lost their lives that day. And then the rest of us who survived. And that's two very different ways of being because, of course we understand the grief of the bereaved, and in many ways for us who survived, that's our grief too. Before that day, they were complete strangers to us, but we carry them in our hearts, And of course, surviving, you just pick up your skirts and you keep going, right? That's what we do. And all those young people, they had young lives and full lives ahead of them, but it's the case that it's hard for many of them. And, that's why memorialisation is important for survivors, and that's why, remembering and trying to support each other through those kind of traumas. God willing, we won't have anything like Lint again. The odds, however,
Yeah.
So true.
It's funny you say pick up your skirts or have them cut off in your case.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You never did get that dress back, did you?
That's right. All those red sandals.
No.
But it's funny because I went past the cafe a couple of days later after the whole thing had gone down. And it's funny you were saying, you felt the police there because the windows were covered with this black plastic.
Yes.
And I could feel the violence like emanating from the building. It is so weird that you said that because it was just the creepiest feeling.
That is a strange thing. And of course, you going there after you would have seen the flowers and all that.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And I have to say, and if I can in this moment, just say to everyone, those of you who bought flowers and who sent love and the many who prayed for us during the actual siege, I can say that I honestly felt the prayers of people. I could feel it. And also the general collective coming around us. I felt that too. And I was forever grateful. And for everyone who brought a flower and who paused, thank you too. It meant a lot.
Well, thank you, Louisa, for
Thank you
coming
so
on.
much.
She wasn't born yesterday. It's been one of our more fabulous and interesting and incredibly impactful interviews. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Janet, we love hearing from people, don't we?
Even more than I love you.
So to leave us a message, go to hope1032.com.au, She Wasn't Born Yesterday podcast, and hit us up on the little Get in Touch box at the bottom of the page.
Doing that right now.
And we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.